You can only get so far pushing things into spreadsheets and then pulling those spreadsheets up. It's better than hand typing things in, but it's not as good as when computers can talk to each other and things can be integrated and be automated. Given that we have a higher level software that now, instead of it being gatekept by finance, other users have a view-only access, which is huge. How can that make them better budget managers, better able to administer their programs, and give them timely information on their kind of attainment of the organization's financial goals?
Welcome to Tech and the Arts, the podcast at the Arts Management and Technology Lab here at Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Ian Hawthorne. I am the lead researcher here at AmpLab. And today I'm going to be interviewing Stewart Urist. Stewart's the general manager of the Pittsburgh Public Theater. And today we're going to be talking about their shift to Sage Intacct, a financial management software, and what that was like for them as an arts nonprofit and what other arts nonprofits might expect from a similar shift to a similar type of software. All right, so I would love if you could just start by giving a bit of a brief overview about what Sage is. I know some people who are listening might not be finance professionals. They might not have a lot of experience in a finance department. So just if you could give a brief overview of what it is, what the software does, and why it's important.
Yeah. Sure. So Sage Intacct, which is the cloud software specifically that I implemented, is an accounting platform like QuickBooks that many small nonprofits use, or NetSuite, Dynamics. There's a bunch of different providers that are in this space. But basically, it's a tool, a specialized kind of database that we use to record all the financial activity of an organization. And what I would say distinguishes Sage Intacct is that, like I mentioned, it's cloud-based. So it's accessed via the web, which makes it very convenient and kind of friendly to desktop computers or PC access. And the amount of customization and integration that is possible with it, which I know we might talk a bit about later, but I would describe it as a very fully featured platform and one that is, in very active development.
Nice. So people who may have experience with clunkier platforms or desktop-based platforms, this is much more streamlined. This is much more web-based.
Yeah, it was designed more recently than some of those kind of legacy platforms. And so it was able to benefit from that more contemporary design thinking. So even if you're using an old platform, like before I was using Sage Intacct at the theater, I was using a platform called FundEZ, which is meant to be hosted on a computer. And even when you access it remotely, they offer a service to, it's called hosted access, it's just running on a box, that they control. So you're remoting into a computer. So the differential in something that's made to be accessed online by the cloud, what the touch and feel experience of that, the speed experience versus remoting into a virtual PC to access the software, it's much, much better. And then you add the kind of active development cycle on top of it where they are able to follow contemporary trends. And they have AI is a big thing in accounting, for example, and they have some AI tools that are in their AP space to kind of look at things that you regular code and try and get in there and help you. So they're pushing forward in interesting ways.
Yeah, sounds definitely very advanced. I know that personally, and many of our listeners may have experience with those server-based programs if they've been in any nonprofit who has less of a budget or just has been operating in the past 10, 20 years. So this is definitely more contemporary. I definitely want to talk a little more about the AI features, maybe a little later. But to sort of pivot in terms of how easy it was to use, you did mention in your article a process of moving your organization from one financial management system to Sage. I'd love to hear a little more about just the background of what that was like. I don't know how many people have been through a internal financial transition like that, but I know that it can tend to be a bit messy, a bit prolonged. I think you said it was from June to September, which actually feels quite short for something like that, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just hear a bit more about that story.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I started with the theater following a lot of the kind of turnover that many organizations experienced in COVID, right? So at the time at the organization, the finance director had moved on, and then the other full-time staff member had moved on. So when I came in, they had one part-time staff member who was she'd been doing AP and AR for a few years, or mostly AR for a few years. And then they had some consultant support, but that was it. And there were about 5 months without a finance director. So it really was one of those, opening the tomb situations. You're just Like all the skeletons come out and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? Try to
Oh
like
boy.
discern financial process and figure it out. Now I'm bolt it all back together. And that was working in an unfamiliar database, FundEasy, that I got some training in, and also just discerning how this accounting department worked, which most of its processes were designed by a longtime staffer, which is the way of nonprofits. So you have a great person, you hold on to that for a long time. So they were there for like the first 39 years of the company, which is
Wow.
pre-internet, like spreadsheet, so the legacy of that paper-based thinking was very evident in all the processes. So, we had to like kind of get the plane flying again first. And the first priority was staffing back up and trying to discern the existing, like how we could, finish out the year and how to get the routine entries done. So that work happened in FundEasy. First, I learned the old system and kind of divide the old processes. Did look for some opportunities to streamline there because we were coming in after the pandemic. People used to remote work, and out of necessity during the pandemic, right, they had built out some processes, some internet adjacent processes. So instead of, printing out the check requests in triplicate and having them signed, they would get them e-signed and then they'd all be filed in directories by check requests in that week's run. Now, is that as simple as like an accounting system where you can attach the backup directly to the invoice, have that be your full database, which is what you would want? No, it's not, but it was a step towards that process. And so we did some incremental change early on, moving away from, we used to print out the credit card statements, like the PDFs for everybody. And then they would hand code all the little expenses. So just going to a spreadsheet where like you could import that into, even the legacy system allowed for that. So the initial process was figuring out how it worked, getting a team on board that could support me in some of the day-to-day, and trying to take some easy wins where we could. And so that was like summer of 22 up through the rest of that year. And then as we got into 2023, we knew the system was deficient. We knew FundEasy was deficient. And that's when we started thinking, when are we going to move on from this? Because you can only get so far pushing things into spreadsheets and then pulling those spreadsheets up. It's better than hand typing things in, but it's not as good as when computers can talk to each other and things can be integrated and be automated. The issues with like our VPN, making the kind of remoting into this environment being challenging. We were recognizing all the deficiencies of the system and kind of over time came to a conclusion that like we really needed to make a change for the good of the business. And then, as you said, once we actually made the decision to move, it was from June of 23 to September that we did all the crosswalking and all the migration, all the data imports. It was a very fast process. I'd recommend more time if you have the luxury, but our season our fiscal starts with September. So breaking it on the fiscal period kind of made the most sense for the move.
Yeah. So that is pretty impressive that it was able to happen essentially in 3 to 4 months, basically. And building off of that, I'd love to know what Sage's role was in helping you onboard. Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that you worked with a consultant in order to help onboard you and your staff. So I'd love if you would just talk a little more about that and their role in it all.
Yeah. So there's a number of different ways I think that accounting systems get implemented, but Intacct, how that team prefers to work is your subscription is directly with Sage Intacct, right? That's where you license the software from. And they do have resources like Sage University has training videos, and they have kind of customer success people who will talk with you and can do some kind of targeted consulting. But for the implementations, they work with like partner firms. Typically, these are accounting firms that have a tech wing. The firm we worked with was called Armanino, and they had a lot of experience working with nonprofits. And they had recently done an implementation for the people I was working with for the nonprofit opera company that used Tessitura, which is our CRM system as well. So they had, some of it's rare, I would say, to find that familiarity with the particular practices of like the nonprofit arts, to have consultants via this firm that we could work with on the implementation. And this firm is actually bringing like a solution to the Sage marketplace to integrate Tessitura and Sage Intacct. Like they were good folks for that purpose, a better level of support than I would have been able to get working directly with Intacct staff, I would say, because they had specialized into this nonprofit practice.
Nice. Would you say that Sage integrates very well with Tessitura, which is currently your CRM? And if so, what does that kind of look like for someone who might be more familiar with a CRM, but less with a financial software?
Yeah, well, we're not yet there. That's one
Okay.
of the areas of opportunity. And there's different ways that people go about these type of integrations. But I would say our mindset has been like crawl, walk, run is what you might
Mm.
call it. So starting with something, less automated, more hands-on, and working up to like the systems actually talking to each other. So we're in the crawl phase right now. And the first thing
Mhm.
that's got to be done, right, is like the codes that are in our tessitura ledger in Pittsburgh, right? We have a remarkable collaboration called Shared Services. And there's 10 cultural institutions downtown. The Shared Services Initiative is housed in the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust, which owns a lot of the venues downtown, including our theater. But the Shared Services Initiative, we have one big tessitura instance, which is great for cost management, for having administrators, for being really at the bleeding edge and like the learning across like the district. But my point is that there's codes in there that mean nothing to
Mm.
us that were set a long time ago. So we need to provide the tessitura instance with ledger codes that mean something to us so that first we can crosswalk the tessitura to like our regular ledger to just have a kind of spreadsheet based import. And that's what we're working on right now is just, can we get codes out here that result in something importable? And once we have that in place, then we can go to like this, the next level that Armanino has built out or another provider that would allow the systems actually to pull it in and have kind of ideally a draft journal entry for that day that you would just approve on. But right now, with the complexity of how contributed revenue is booked, especially with a capital campaign going on, how earned revenue is booked, which has all these different events and considerations about timing, like when you would release money from like a restriction because it's for a future period. There's enough complexity there that our finance team still wants to be hands-on with it. But I do have high hopes that, like this is something I did build out at Ford's Theater. They had Dynamics GP, and I got that up past the crawl phase of like, we had a file that came right in, we could review it, we could approve it, we could push it, and it saves so much data entry time. So I think it's like a good objective to work towards. And then it's just remove some of the human errors of people like hand keying in the numbers from one system to another. You're going to have mistakes that way, and it's a lot easier to get it in clean and to focus your kind of management and cleanup effort elsewhere.
Definitely. But the capabilities are there, which is
for sure
a very important part there, particularly with Sage. So that's
I just said there's like a marketplace of different integrations and implementations. It likes to talk to payroll providers. It likes to talk to credit card expense management programs. That's one of the strengths of Sage Intacct in general is this kind of, it's built for this type of integration to external systems, and we do have it talking directly to bill, spend, and expense, which is what we use for our credit cards. So those can push in directly. And it talks to our banks, which is having those transactions loaded right in and being able to have things match or even create journal entries automatically based on rules that we have configured. It really smooths like the bank reconciliation process. And it ensures the completeness of your activity. Like if everything from your bank from your bank feed, like from your bank statement, is showing up in your accounting system, you can't miss anything. You just need to make sure you attribute or match the activity.
Yeah. And so I know you had mentioned this in your article as well, but while we're on the subject of integrations, have you ever, since starting Sage, have you added integrations that you maybe didn't initially request in the setup phase? And if so, what was that like? How easy was that? And how easy was it also to educate staff on that going forward when it came up?
No, it's a good question. I would say in the integration realm after implementation, because this was only less than a year ago that we went live. So tessitura is the next big hurdle for us. And that's where we've been focused, is getting past this mapping in this phase. We brought in a new leader of the finance department. So just handing off the platform, having the benefit of crossover, like me, having been in that seat and then handing it off to another individual to lead the department. I think we were focused on how do we train people in the system, how to manage the existing tools smoothly and not have any backsliding versus trying to add new. I would say the thing that we've focused on is really leveraging, instead of adding new integrations, it's helping our budget managers utilize the tools that exist within Sage, which are robust and building process around it so that they're checking in on their budgets, which they can see live now, which is huge for them, that budget versus actual activity. So it's really this chapter has not been so much about integration, although I do think we're going to come back to trying to streamline everything. It has been about, given that we have a higher level software that now, instead of it being gatekept by finance, other users have a kind of, view only access, which is huge. How can that make them better budget managers, better able to administer their programs and give them timely information on their kind of attainment of the organization's financial goals?
That's an excellent point. Let's talk about that for a second, because you did mention an open budgeting process. And I know a lot of people listening who maybe have experience in an arts organization or even just a nonprofit organization know that budgeting is a huge task. A lot of people approach budgeting very differently. And so I'm just wondering how Sage helps in the budgeting process, what that may look like for people both in the finance department and outside of the finance department, and how you are managing something that is able to make it more open, like Sage seems to do.
Yeah. So a couple threads to tug on here. I think starting from the end point, actually, where the budgeting has been done, it has been uploaded into Intacct, right? There's a couple ways to get it in there, but just imagining that it's in there, having timely access to budget versus actual figures, seems so rudimentary, but because of how long it could take a close a month and have kind of financial reporting ready, often organizations work on this delay. And so the nice thing about, you can build dashboards or you can build reports that will show up directly in people's email inboxes, a lot of automation possibility, just putting them in regular contact with their numbers and down to the day, right? If I enter an invoice and I book it to somebody's department, they're going to see that invoice, dated today immediately in a live way in their actuals, right? So it removes that time delay. You still do need to have financial period closing and look at it in periodic chunks when you know all of the month's activity you're in, but it puts people more in touch with their numbers. And it removes the kind of nuts and bolts questions that you get of hey, did this person get paid yet? Has this bill been entered? They can click right in. They can see, oh yeah, it was check 6782 and it was cut on this day. So I don't even have to go bug the finance people. They can focus on their stuff about it. I have that info at my fingertips.
That's but it's such a time saver.
It's great. I mean, then that gets, but the staff really likes it. But in terms of getting it into the system and this open budgeting, right? There's a lot of ways to accomplish it, right? So we used to have this monstrous Excel workbook that I'm sure many people can relate to, having their own monstrous Excel workbook. And every department had a slice of it. They did their budgeting. We stitched it together. And then it was sorry, you got to cut 15%. So have fun. And it's a lot of passing sheets back and forth, which results in version control issues. Or if you're sharing access to the sheet, you're worried about somebody breaking something they shouldn't have access to. So you can certainly do it that way, right? And you can get that into a CSV and import it into Sage and then have all the benefits that we were just talking about in terms of the live access and that budget information lives there according, to how you built it. But the other tool we, opted into is called Sage Intacct Planning, which is another tool that they own. And that's an integration, but it talks directly to the budgeting module. So what the advantage of SIP is that I can share pieces of that with individual budget managers. So if I have a marketing director, I can share just the marketing slice there. And then, so maybe I built out where I think the things that are known for marketing, I know what the salary and wages are going to be, right? I know basically how much they spend on each show. And then the marketing director can have the ability to get in there and edit. And then I don't have to worry about them breaking anything, but they see live, if something changes or needs cut, they have access to that right away. There's no issue of oh, I had an old version of the spreadsheet. I didn't know that the budget changed this way. I only discovered it, when it came into the system. So we're building it together in a kind of collaborative way. And it's the same thing can be done for forecasting in there, which is really nice. So when you're coming back together mid-year, you can share those kind of same slices of the budget. Or if I'm working with the managing director, I can share the whole thing and we can go down through all of it, but maybe they only have view-only access because they want the finance staff to do the editing on it. So it's quite a nice tool. And then actually pushing it into Sage, is one button and then it just boop, puts it in there. The old version of the budget gets saved as a copy so you don't lose anything. But this, if I have reports built that are looking for my annual budget or whatever, they will all kind of point to this new version that I pushed up if that's, how I've configured it, which is, it's nice to have something that's so complete and much less you can see all the history really easily. You can revert things. It's just a lot less prone to error than a big messy spreadsheet is. You mess up a formula somewhere and oops, that's $50,000 that didn't make it into my budget. Yeah.
Definitely. I'm hearing a lot on access and expediency, which seem to be some of the biggest things here where you can slice and dice it. This person or this department gets all they need. They don't need to be overwhelmed by anything. Access can be easily controlled.
Yeah, it's about what do you believe the role of the finance department in an organization to be, right? Like, are they gatekeepers that like enforce process and keep the rest of the organization in line, right? Or is it like essential, like underpinning machinery that like when it is working well is like relatively quiet, but makes everything else that happens in an organization a little bit easier to do. I do believe in the importance of kind of setting standards and processes, but I do think that like finance departments need to serve the main mission of a nonprofit organization, right? And need to be focused on helping people know where they are against their budget, be able to get payments and things. It just needs to be focused on that streamline, that expediency, that making it easier for everybody, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that note you made about it being not being gatekeepers, because I do feel like a lot of people can develop this dynamic and a lot of finance departments might not do much to help alleviate that. But it really is such a fundamental machinery. Like you said, every organization needs a healthy finance department, and they also need people to be able to work with the finance department so that it all functions, so that you make your year end, so that you can pass your audit, right? So,
yes.
So 2 last questions. You mentioned AI, and this is the Arts Management and Technology Lab, so I have to ask, where would you don't have to give like a comprehensive list, but where do you see AI impacting this type of software the most? You can focus on Sage, but also what have they maybe been advertising in terms of AI increasing their capabilities, making your life easier? What's the state of AI there?
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a lot of like routine, repeatable activity that happens in the accounting world, right? And that's personally, and being newish in this space too, but where I see the opportunity for AI. But when I've engaged with AI tools, it is not a replacement yet, perhaps for like higher level critical thought, analysis, the judgment that comes from knowing the specifics of your industry and how things need to be applied and enforced. But when it comes to, oh man, like here's a health bill, it always gets coded to this place. It's health. The like accounts payable, accounts receivable, these things that have a lot of like routine, like here I go, typing in the 5-digit account code. It's this department. That's the type of stuff that I think it's some of the initial places that I've seen Sage Intacct focused on is like, hey, when there's trends here, like let us suggest what's going on. And, that AP process, and instead of, a human having to take the time to like, okay, the PDF bill goes into my invoices box. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to type the vendor information and I'm going to decide what code it is. And then I'm going to send it to the manager for approval. That's stuff that it's good to have a human's eye. You need a human's eye on that at some point in the process to make sure it's going right. But certainly OCR, text reading exists. So it can scan that. It can pull out the address and the vendor and stuff, right? And it can look to where you've coded things for that vendor before and make a pretty good guess about what's going on in here. So I think that's a no-brainer space where AI can come in and help streamline some of the routine coding. Like AI is good at looking for patterns too. When it comes to routine entries, allocations, things you do periodically, I think there's probably potential in that realm too. Although like I'm not well educated enough to know the mechanics of it, but I know there is like within Sage Intacct, right? Like an enable the AI kind of support. And then there are different ways that they're looking at building that out. It's a pretty new, like recent in their release notes, like 1 or 2 versions ago, adding this. And it's certainly, I'm sure where they're going to be interested in because it's where they can, it's a much more expensive platform than my previous software was, right? That is the other side of this stuff, but it's a way to demonstrate that value and to bring the benefits of a more sophisticated, higher level system to bear.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. Definitely for all the accounts payable professionals out there who can save some time on the routine monthly bills.
Right.
Yeah.
And focus on like the higher level work they would wish to be doing in terms of like going back and, managing that balance sheet or seeing what's outstanding, sending those dunning notices and building the relationships with the vendors that are going to make things, getting on electronic payments, the things that like are person to person, that are discretion, that are management based and are less like, I'm going to type the numbers from this thing into this thing, which will numb you after a while.
Absolutely. Maybe get people even more excited about wanting to pursue finance careers or roles in this space that they maybe even didn't think about because they did think, oh, it's just a lot of data entry or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much need in the finance space. If that's a opportunity that comes with it, That'd be great.
Absolutely. And so last part, I'm glad you mentioned pricing because I want you to have the space basically to recommend to any nonprofit out there or financial manager of a nonprofit, if you are thinking of changing your financial management software, whether it's to Sage or just you need a change, what would be your pieces of advice in terms of balancing cost, access, features, AI? What would be your pieces of advice for someone on a high level?
Yeah. I mean, I think like with any technological platform, right? Like tech is a tool, right? It's like a means to an end. It's not like a solution in and of itself. It's not something that's virtuous for its own sake. So I think like you have to start within a kind of like needs assessment frame about like, how much do we actually need, right? For a nonprofit, that has maybe a couple $1 million operating budget, QuickBooks Online might be exactly where you need to be. But in that needs assessment, you might notice things, that are deficient in your system, like ours could not talk to the bank. Ours could not receive on an automated way any external reports or any data sources. Our reporting was deficient, right? We couldn't kick a balance sheet and a P&L out from there that was usable for presentation purposes. So I had to kick it into Excel and spent hours and hours. So you need to identify what are the desired functionalities and then try and like price how much would it be to seek that out. Like I knew we had an interest in reporting, in timeliness of data, in integration. And I vetted a few platforms and Sage, was the right fit given the size of our business, which is about an $8 million operating budget, and the complexity, which we had more than a dozen different departments and programs within that. The dimensionality of it was very complicated and not well served by that old system. So I don't think you need to just like seek out the biggest, shiniest thing. It's not going to be right for everyone. But if you have unmet need, like it's good to check in with like, is this tool like adequate for our needs, and can we, would a different platform provide benefits such that it outweighs it? Like the Sage folks actually had a worksheet where they showed what they anticipate in terms of staff time savings on the kind of routine aspects that would be able to automate to help us make the case, for why this is right. Because on paper, it was 10 times more expensive than our previous implementation, right? But the quality of what the finance department is spending its time doing instead of data entry, sort of very manual paper-based reconciliation process, the ability to automate the routine work and focus more on the quality of that reporting, on, the timeliness of our month-end close, like overall the business results, make it worth, like our machine is better and quieter, under the hood from having gone through that. But I think, you also need to be worried about not biting off more than you need. Sage is kind of like a mid-level solution. Oracle or something like that is like what the big enterprises use. There are good platforms at various levels. But I would be wary. They could get what you pay for a little bit. And I think, not to like ding my friends at FindAZ, who I think are offering like the price point is unbeatable for that product. But I think in a contemporary accounting environment, it just, I felt so much was missing in terms of where I know things to be that even a tool like QuickBooks Online, which is much more affordable than Sage is, even the amount of integration and automation that exists in a platform like that, you can get snippets of this at a lower price level, depending on what your needs are.
Absolutely. So matching size and scale of your organization to the needs, to what the platforms provide. Absolutely.
Super start with what you need. Start with what you need and don't let the salespeople tell you.
That's a very important point to end on as well. Do not get pushed by salespeople unless they're giving you exactly what you need, in which case might be good.
Yeah, in kind. We love that.
Yeah, in kind. Well, thank you so much, Stu, for talking to me today about Sage Intacct. Really appreciate this. Hopefully this is super helpful for anybody out there managing finances, dealing with finances, thinking about a change like this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tech in the Arts, the podcast series of the Arts Management and Technology Laboratory. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, be sure to check out our other episodes and share with the arts or technology aficionados in your life. Check out our website at amtlab.org, that's amt-lab.org, or you can email us at info@amtlab.org. Follow us on Instagram at Tech in the Arts or Facebook and LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. Our season runs from September through May, so feel free to follow us on your preferred podcast app. Thanks for listening.